They brought her to him in a crate. Not a cage, no, that would have been too obvious. This was high-grade reinforced polymer, temperature-controlled, soundproofed, and suspiciously similar to the cargo units they used to transport high-value tech across the Ophiuchi belt. The kind with pressure seals and a cheerful red sticker that said, "Fragile, handle with diplomatic care." Lieutenant Darren Holt stared at it for a full 3 minutes before saying, "You sent me a fridge?" The diplomatic courier, a pudgy, balding man who looked like his uniform had been shrink-wrapped around him in error, blanched. "It's not a fridge, Lieutenant. It's your reward." He glanced around the outpost hangar like someone might overhear him, but there were only 2 of them, and a half-drunk service droid trying to weld its own leg back on in the corner. Darren folded his arms. "This better not be another toaster with an attitude." "No, sir. This one's, organic." He didn't know what that meant until the crate hissed open with a slow sigh, revealing her. She stepped out with all the grace of a knife being drawn from a sheath. Tall, slim, skin like silvered ash, smooth but not flawless, more like a living thing shaped under pressure rather than grown. And her ears, long and arched back like sleek metallic leaves, twitched as though testing the air. Virelli, no doubt about it. He recognized the bone structure from the briefings. The propaganda feeds had always made them look more monstrous, less human. This one looked human enough to stir some inconvenient recognition, and alien enough to keep his hand hovering near the stunner on his belt. She looked around, sniffed the air once, then fixed her jet-black eyes on him. "You're the human?" she asked, her accent precise but curious, as if tasting the language. Darren blinked. "Depends. You the new coffee machine?" "Unlikely. I make better conversation." The courier cleared his throat, interrupting the moment with bureaucratic urgency. "You'll find her genetic leash is already encoded to your command profile, sir. Fully compliant, legally sanctioned. You are her handler now. Her status is," he squinted at a datapad, "War Compensation Asset, Class 4. The Virelli woman raised one elegantly curved brow. "You humans really know how to make slavery sound like a tax deduction." "Hey," Darren said, trying not to smirk. "Be grateful. You could have been handed to General Mathis. He'd have turned you into a floor lamp. I would have set him on fire. Definitely smarter than the last floor lamp." The courier made an uncomfortable noise and fled the hangar like it owed him money. They walked through the outpost together. Though walked was generous. Darren led, she strolled. It was a low-budget military hub on a terraformed moon that had once been 80% ammonia swamp, now 70% dust and 30% government lies. Gravity generators worked about 80% of the time, which meant furniture often hovered 3 inches off the ground like it was trying to escape. "This is the command center," Darren said, gesturing to a room where a cracked hollow map flickered between solar systems and someone's personal screensaver of dancing cats. "And that's the sleeping pod. Mine. Yours is down the hall. I assume you don't snore?" "I assume you do." He shot her a look. "You know, for a fully compliant war compensation asset, you're very mouthy." "I was bred for resilience," she said, "and sarcasm, apparently." He tried not to like her, failed within the hour. By the time she'd hijacked the kitchen processor to generate something resembling Virelli nutrient paste, neon green and pulsing slightly, he decided she was either going to kill him or save him, possibly both. As he took the first bite of his rehydrated pasta, tasted like cardboard seasoned with despair, she leaned against the counter and watched him with eyes too sharp to be casual. "I'll make this easy for you," she said. "I won't try to escape. I won't try to kill you. And I definitely won't call you master. Deal?" He looked at her, at the flickering shadows of war still lurking behind her calm posture. Then he raised his fork and offered her a bite. "Deal, but only if you agree to do the dishes." "Then we're at war again." He grinned. The war was over. The story had just begun. To morning on Outpost 7, Kay began, as always, with a gentle explosion. The sound echoed through the utility corridor like a metal drum filled with regrets. Darren Holt groaned, rolled off the cot, which hovered about half a foot off the ground due to a gravity glitch, and landed in a practice sprawl on the floor. The lights blinked on reluctantly, casting a dull cyan hue over the walls, like the color of alien vomit if it went to art school. Computer, he muttered, rubbing one eye. Status report. Gravity field at 87%. Kitchen processor offline. Explosion detected in section C4. Please do not be alarmed, unless your name is Darren Holt. Then, yes, be alarmed. He sighed. Why does the AI hate me? We ran your personality profile through a sarcasm filter. It choked. Throwing on a shirt that smelled faintly of ozone in yesterday's bad decisions, Darren trudged into the hall. The source of the explosion, unsurprisingly, was standing in front of the outpost central conduit panel, holding a scorched capacitor and looking extremely pleased with herself. Good morning, Liara said sweetly. Her long ears perked like antennae tuned to a jazz frequency. I fixed the filtration system. He stared at the smoking panel behind her. You blew up the filtration system. She raised the capacitor. Semantics. It turned out that fixing to the Varelli meant rerouting energy through alternate conduits using whatever parts were lying around, including the emergency espresso unit, which Darren hadn't even realized they had until it was repurposed to regulate coolant flow. I was told we needed better airflow, Liara explained innocently as she followed him back to the kitchen, where the only surviving appliance was a dented hot plate and a breakfast concoction from a pouch of Varelli nutrient foam, slurped it with an expression of solemn concentration, and then said, You look like a dehydrated cactus. That's because I'm out of coffee and emotional stability. She tilted her head, ears twitching. Do humans normally pair those two? He gave her a look. We're a fragile species held together by caffeine and denial. Liara sat on the counter, legs swinging, scanning the schematics he'd left open on the holotablet. Your security systems are laughably basic. Thanks, that's what everyone wants to hear about their home defense. I could break into your comms channel using only a spoon and a bad attitude. You already did hack my mess hall door, twice. That wasn't hacking, she said smugly. That was artistic expression. She was insufferable, clever, evasive, brilliant, probably. And it was beginning to drive Darren mad in a way that wasn't entirely unpleasant. At night, he caught himself thinking about the shape of her sarcasm, the precise cadence of her pauses when she insulted him. She insulted him often, with affection, he suspected, or at least consistent enthusiasm. And yet there was something deeper, an undercurrent that ran beneath their verbal sparring and juvenile pranks. He'd started to notice how she always sat with her back to a wall, how her eyes scanned every room twice before she entered, how she never turned her back on him for longer than a breath. She didn't trust him, not really, but she was trying to live here. That counted for something. Later, as he reviewed their dwindling supply manifest and tried not to worry about how many times Liara had modified the outpost power grid just to see what would happen, he found her perched on top of the central tower, where the atmosphere dome met raw starlight. No helmet, just her and the wind. He opened the comm line. You know, if the dome ruptures, you'll be Space Jam. Her voice crackled through. Then let me be cherry-flavored. He smiled, despite himself. Why do you always climb things? He asked. Because your species builds walls, she said, and mine was taught to see over them. He didn't have a response to that. Instead, he brought her a cup of rehydrated cocoa. She sniffed it suspiciously. Is this poison? Only emotionally. She took a sip, then another. Disgusting, she said. I love it. They sat in silence for a while, the stars wheeling silently overhead, like they were trying to get somewhere important. Two survivors, one war, and a growing collection of inside jokes that sounded like the beginning of something that scared them both. He didn't call her a prisoner. She didn't call him a captor. Maybe they were both just tired of definitions. The toaster finally achieved sentience on a Wednesday. It began with smoke. Not the usual kind either. The outpost was no stranger to things gently smoldering. But this was aggressive smoke, purposeful smoke, the sort of smoke that said, I've considered my life choices and I choose arson. Darren Holt entered the mess hall to find Liara crouched in front of the toaster, speaking softly in Varelli dialect. He recognized just enough of the guttural vowels and melodic phrasing to pick out the phrase, and if you try to incinerate another carbohydrate, I swear on the bones of my ancestors. Is it threatening the bread again? Darren asked, squinting through the haze. She didn't look up. It screamed when I inserted the toast. I do that too, usually before meetings. She stood, brushing ash from her sleeves, long ears flicking with irritation. Your technology is emotionally unstable. That toaster came standard issue, along with mild depression and a free coffee mug. The mug lied. Darren peered at the machine. Its single glowing eye, knew he was quite certain it hadn't had one yesterday, blinked red, then blue, then made a low whir noise that sounded suspiciously like judgment. He sighed. I'll put in a requisition for an exorcist. Liara muttered something under her breath that translated roughly to primitive monkey tools and their death wishes. Then, as if the moment hadn't happened, she plucked an apple from the nutrient dispenser and took a bite with elegant vengeance. Later, with the toaster unplugged and placed gently in the airlock for observation, they moved to maintenance diagnostics. The outpost had started developing mood swings, fluctuating temperature gradients, rogue lighting sequences, and a newly installed AI assistant that introduced itself with, "Greetings, meatbags. How may I disappoint you today?" Liara, ever intrigued by malfunction, dove into the diagnostics console with a gleam in her obsidian eyes. Your systems are folding in on themselves. That bad? It's trying to launch escape pods every time you snore. They spent the next 2 hours inside the access shaft beneath the communications array, rewiring cooling conduits and arguing over whether earth music counted as noise pollution. Liara voted yes. Darren insisted she hadn't heard real jazz yet. She countered by playing a Varelli opera performed entirely on vibrating glass and whalebone reeds. He admitted defeat. Not that she gloated. Much. What was it like? She asked suddenly, voice echoing down the corridor as she twisted a fiber-line conduit into place. The day the war ended? He paused. It wasn't a question she'd asked before. I was covered in mud, missing 2 teeth, and sitting on a collapsed hover tank, he said after a beat. I'd just watched half my squad disappear in an antimatter burst. The ceasefire came through like a whisper. No fanfare, just silence. She nodded once. Varelli's cities fell quiet too. We lit lanterns, not for victory, for memory. There was a silence between them, this time thick with something neither dared name. Then the pipe above them hissed loudly and dumped coolant fluid directly down Darren's back. He shrieked. She cackled. Next time, he grumbled, wringing out his shirt, I'm letting the toaster kill us. You say that now, Liara said, smirking, but you'll miss me when you're toast. He groaned. That's it. No more puns. Pun embargo starts now. I'm a rebel, she said, deadpan. You should have expected resistance. That night, after systems stabilized and the toaster sulked quietly in isolation, Darren lay awake in his bunk, staring at the flickering light panel above. Something had shifted. Not in the outpost, though that too, perhaps. The systems had stopped trying to eject them into space. The lights no longer flickered like haunted dreams. No, it was something else. Something about the way Liara had said lanterns. The way she laughed like she'd forgotten how, but was remembering anyway. He didn't know what they were. Companions? Prisoner and warden? Roommates with shared trauma and an unkillable toaster? He just knew that every time she looked at him with those sharp, thoughtful eyes, something in his chest started rebooting, slowly, glitchily, like an old machine trying to hum again after too long in the dark. And he wondered, for the first time in a long time, what kind of man he was becoming when war wasn't the only thing that defined him. Darren Holt awoke to the sound of screaming. Not the desperate, panicked kind. He'd heard enough of that during the war to last several lifetimes. But a long, drawn-out mechanical shriek that could only mean one thing. The toaster was back. He bolted upright, smacked his head on the floating shelf above his bunk, and staggered into the corridor, half-dressed and armed with a wrench. He burst into the mess hall like a man possessed, ready to banish whatever cybernetic demon had returned to torment them. Instead, he found Liara calmly sitting at the table, sipping something bright purple and far too viscous to be safe. The toaster, now reattached to the wall with an unholy collection of zip ties and quantum tape, chirped happily as it ejected a perfectly golden slice of bread onto a plate. "Good morning," she said without looking up. "Your murderous appliance has developed a sense of artistry. It printed a star map on the toast." Darren squinted. Sure enough, the toast bore an intricate burn pattern that looked suspiciously like the Orion Spur, complete with little craters for the outer asteroid fields. He lowered the wrench. "You taught it astronomy?" "I encourage its self-expression. I need stronger coffee or better security protocols." She had a point. Again. After breakfast, during which the toaster played what sounded like Varelli lullabies through its power coil, they ran a full systems check on the outpost. Darren wasn't sure whether it was Liara's influence or the fact that their nearest superior was 12 light-years away and not due for a check-in for another 3 months. But things had begun to work more efficiently and weirder. The hydroponics lab now grew bioluminescent algae that blinked when spoken to. The temperature control system had somehow been reprogrammed to mimic a mild autumn breeze, which meant Darren now needed socks. And the central AI, once rigid and apathetic, now occasionally whispered unsolicited advice. "Hey," it said once while he adjusted the shield harmonics, "you should tell her how you feel." "I should uninstall your memory core," Darren replied flatly. Liara didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did and found it funny. She always found strange things funny. That day she dragged him into the desert. The surface of the moon wasn't supposed to have a desert, technically. It was the result of a terraforming accident that turned a quarter of the moon's northern hemisphere into a red sand wasteland, scattered with black crystal shards that hummed softly underfoot. "This isn't ominous at all," Darren said as they trudged across the cracked surface in their exosuits. "Next time you suggest a field trip, remind me to fake an illness." Liara didn't answer. She walked with the kind of focus that said she was listening to things he couldn't hear. "I used to hide in places like this," she said at last. "During the last phase of the war, when the orbital strikes started, we scattered underground." He didn't speak, just followed. Eventually, they reached a cluster of jagged rocks, half buried in sand. She knelt, brushed something away, a bit of broken hull plating, scorched black but unmistakably Varelli make. The symbol engraved on it was cracked but still legible, a spiral within a star. "This was a refugee pod," she murmured. "My cousin was on one just like it. She never made it off-world." Darren lowered his head, not out of guilt, though maybe there was some of that too, but out of something older, respect, acknowledgement. "She would have liked you," Liara added after a moment. He smiled faintly. "She liked sarcastic humans with bad posture. She liked people who asked questions." They sat there for a long while beneath the broken sky, with only the gentle whir of life support between them and the silence of memory. Then, predictably, the mood was ruined. Darren's comm crackled. "Proximity alert. Unidentified shuttle approaching. ETA. 10 minutes. He stood. "Shuttle? Who?" "Not scheduled," Liara said. "Already checking the frequency. Military registry. No call sign." They exchanged a glance. Something sharp passed between them. Not fear exactly, more like readiness. They returned to the outpost in silence, weapons unlocked, systems armed. Even the toaster bristled slightly, its heat coils glowing with anticipation. "Could be nothing," Darren said, checking the perimeter sensors. "Could be everything," Liara replied. The outpost lights dimmed as the ship entered the atmosphere, engines humming like a forgotten tune. Something had come to find them, and neither of them knew whether it was friend or foe or worse, bureaucracy. Quicker the ship landed like a migraine, sudden, unwelcome, and full of noise. Outpost 7K shuddered as the shuttle's landing struts gouged the moon's crust, sending fine red dust flying into the atmosphere dome. It was a newer model than Darren had expected. Sleek, angular, clearly designed by someone who thought subtle was a weakness. It bore no insignia, no markings, just a matte black finish and an attitude. Darren adjusted the strap on his pulse rifle and muttered, "Tell me this is a social visit." Liara stood beside him at the observation bay, long ears flicking with faint agitation. If they brought snacks, I might reconsider vaporizing them. Define snacks. Anything not shaped like a nutrient brick or containing 40% glue. Fair. The outer airlock hissed open with a dramatic exhalation. Darren braced himself. Liara casually leaned against the console like she was about to critique a dinner party. Two figures stepped inside, both clad in high-collar uniforms that gleamed with so much polish, Darren could see his own exhausted reflection in one of the boots. A third followed, taller, bulkier, and very clearly a security bot with the personality of a traffic cone and the firepower of a small starship. "Lieutenant Darren Holt," the lead officer asked, removing his helmet with all the grace of a tax audit. "That's me," Darren said, forcing a smile, "though I prefer Outpost Emperor on formal occasions." The man didn't smile. "I'm Commander Riven. Central Command sent us to evaluate the status of Outpost 7K and assess certain anomalies in the living arrangements." "Anomalies," Darren echoed. "Do you mean the homicidal toaster or the algae that flirts with maintenance droids?" Riven's eyes flicked to Liara. "I meant the alien." Liara offered a polite smile that could cut steel. "The alien has a name." "And a pulse rifle," Darren added, "which she knows how to use." The commander did not seem amused. Bureaucrats rarely were. What followed was the longest debrief of Darren's life. Commander Riven asked questions with the precision of a surgical laser. Inventory discrepancies, communications logs, structural irregularities, the bizarre growth patterns of the moon's flora, and most notably, why Darren had not transferred his gift to a designated containment facility per protocol. "Because she's not a gift," Darren said flatly. "She's a person." "That's not for you to decide, Lieutenant," Riven replied without looking up from his tablet. At some point, Liara left the room. Whether out of frustration or boredom, Darren wasn't sure. She didn't slam the door. She didn't need to. The silence she left behind was sharper than any argument. Outside, the wind picked up. Artificial, sure, but insistent. The atmosphere dome adjusted pressure levels to compensate, causing the lights to dim momentarily and the AI to announce, "Mood lighting initiated." Darren whispered, "Not now, Greg." "Understood," Darren said, leaning in the doorway. "Relocate me," she said without turning. "Decommission the outpost? Reclassify the toaster as a Class 4 threat?" He blinked. "Yes, all of that. How did you—" She shrugged. "Bureaucrats are predictable. They like systems more than people." Darren approached, watching the gentle pulsing glow of the plants reflect off her skin. "I told them I wouldn't comply." Her ears twitched. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said, "but I'm really starting to enjoy not getting promoted." She looked at him for a long moment. Something flickered across her face. Too fast to name, too complex to ignore. "They'll come back," she said, "with orders, bigger guns, paperwork. Then we'll build a bigger toaster." She laughed, short and real. That night, they sat on the roof of the outpost under a sky filled with unfamiliar stars. The shuttle was gone, but its shadow still lingered in their minds. Darren passed her a thermal flask of not-quite coffee. "I was thinking," he said, "about what comes next." Liara raised an eyebrow. "Escape plan?" "Number partnership." She blinked. "You mean like business?" "No," he said, nudging her shoulder. "Like cohabitating in a mutually sarcastic way until the galaxy figures itself out." She smiled, and this time it didn't hurt. "Fine," she said, "but I want custody of the toaster. Over my charred corpse." They clinked mugs under the stars, and for one night, the universe was quiet. The stars above Outpost 7K looked different now. Darren leaned against the edge of the observation deck, helmet tucked under one arm, a datapad in the other. The station was quieter these days, not empty, just calmer, like an old machine that had finally found a rhythm. Even the central AI had stopped making passive-aggressive announcements. Occasionally it still played lo-fi whale sounds at midnight, but Darren had come to find it soothing. Below, Liara stood beside the comms relay, tuning one of the upgraded dishes with a tool belt slung around her waist, and a look of fierce concentration on her face. She wore her usual uniform, modified to include a sarcastic patch that read, "Property of no one," and her long ears twitched with every magnetic frequency shift. Darren called down, "You're going to over-calibrate it again?" She didn't look up. "Your understanding of Varelli wave harmonics is deeply flawed." "Hey, I passed the military's communications exam by guessing C for half the questions. That's called strategic intuition," she snorted. "You're lucky I like hopeless causes." The 3 weeks had passed since Commander Riven's visit. 3 long, tense weeks during which every passing star might have hidden another unwelcome inspection. But no second shuttle came, no follow-up orders, no extraction teams. Whether by oversight or deliberate silence, Command had left them alone, which was a mistake, because in that time, the outpost had transformed. With Liara's help, Darren rebuilt the power grid, rerouted the defensive perimeter, and turned the hydroponics lab into a marvel of alien agricultural fusion. They even taught the AI to speak Varelli, badly, and encouraged the algae to sing in polyphony. The result was part base, part haven, and entirely theirs. Liara had stopped sleeping with her boots on. Darren had stopped flinching at every system alert. Neither of them said it aloud, but they both felt it. Peace. Not the forced kind that followed war like a bandage on a fresh wound, but the earned kind, the living kind. One afternoon, while cataloging a new mineral deposit that may or may not have been mildly sentient, Darren asked, "Do you ever think about leaving?" Liara didn't answer immediately. She was crouched beside the mineral, stroking it like a pet. It vibrated happily under her palm. "I used to," she said at last. "Every day. I wanted to escape, to go somewhere no one knew my name or my species. And now?" She looked up at him, her eyes dark and full of quiet galaxies. "Now I want to stay," she said, "because here I'm not a prisoner, and you're not a soldier. We're just people." He exhaled slowly, the breath catching in his throat. "Yeah, that's what I was afraid of." They found the old war beacon during a maintenance sweep, half buried in a crater, still transmitting a signal pulsing weakly into the void. It had been designed to call in reinforcements, to summon fleets and fire. Now it just sat there, blinking like a dying heartbeat. Darren stood over it, pulse rifle slung casually over one shoulder. Liara beside him, arms crossed. "What do we do with it?" he asked. She didn't hesitate. "We bury it." So they did. Together they hauled the metal carcass back into the crater, covered it with moon rock and dust until not even a shimmer of alloy remained. Then without ceremony they turned their backs and walked away. No speeches, no salutes, just silence and the feeling of something finally ending. The final upgrade to the outpost was completed on a Thursday. The toaster had been reprogrammed to make alien sweetbread. The central AI now offered relationship advice. The algae grew in the shape of constellations, and in the mess hall, over mugs of Syntha Cafe and shared stories, Darren and Liara made a choice. Not a declaration, not a dramatic vow, just a quiet agreement to stay, to build, to heal. Sometime later, months maybe, when Command finally remembered they existed, a transmission came through. The voice on the other end was crisp and bureaucratic. "Lieutenant Holt, your outpost is being reassigned. You and your cohabitant will be extracted in 48 hours. Prepare for departure." Darren muted the channel. He looked at Liara. She was already smiling. "We have 48 hours to make the outpost disappear," she said. He grinned. "I'll get the cloaking net. You bribe the algae." "Deal." That night, beneath a sky full of stars and possibility, they sat on the roof, shoulders touching, watching the universe spin. "You know," Darren said, "you were the weirdest gift I've ever received." Liara raised a brow. "And you were the worst reward I've ever been forced to tolerate." They clinked mugs, laughter echoing through the dome. They weren't soldiers anymore. They weren't enemies. They weren't even just survivors. They were something new, and for the first time, they weren't afraid of it. Yorsin.